11. Central Intelligence Agency. Viewed by some as a revitalized model of the Office of Strategic Services, the Central Intelligence Agency was established as a subunit of the National Security Council by the National Security Act of 1947, with responsibilities 1. To advise the NSC on intelligence matters related to national security, 2. To make recommendations to the Council regarding the coordination of intelligence activities of the federal executive departments and agencies, 3. To correlate and evaluate intelligence and provide for its appropriate dissemination, 4. To perform such additional services for the benefit of existing intelligence entities as the NSC determines can be effectively accomplished by a central organization, and 5. To perform such additional functions and duties relating to national security intelligence as the Council may direct. The agency's organic statute was amended in 1949 by the Central Intelligence Agency Act, which sought to improve CIA administration by strengthening the powers of the director. Among other authorities granted, this law exempts the agency from any statutory provisions requiring the publication or disclosure of the organization, functions, names, official titles, salaries, or numbers of personnel employed, and further directs the Office of Management and Budget, then identified as the Bureau of the Budget, to make no reports on these matters to Congress. Nevertheless, in spite of this restrictive language, some gleanings are available on the organization of the CIA. Footnote: there are, of course, various accounts of CIA operations and exploits, but these are generally unenlightening with regard to organizational considerations and are therefore outside of the scope of this study. End footnote. This scenario necessarily includes not only the evolution and current status of the agency's internal structure, but extends as well to entities apart from the agency, which are headed by the Director of Central Intelligence and unofficial affiliates in the service of the CIA. The head of the old Central Intelligence Group, Admiral Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter, served as the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency. But while this leadership continuity assured an easy transition from one unit to its successor, the agency was struggling with internal organization difficulties and liaison relationships during its first years of operation. These problems diminished with the arrival of Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith, former Secretary of the General Staff under General George C. Marshall and Chief of Staff to General Dwight D. Eisenhower in Europe, as Director of Central Intelligence in 1950. Former CIA official Lyman B. Kirkpatrick, Jr. offers this view of Smith's impact on the agency. Quote, under the persistent prodding of General Smith, the intelligence community moved toward coordination and centralization. He was impatient with jurisdictional arguments, whether within the CIA or among the services. His attitude was that there was more than enough work for everybody. He had the authority and used it. Within the CIA, he reorganized the operational arm, established new guidelines for interagency cooperation, and established a support arm to provide the personnel, training, communication, logistics, and security so necessary in intelligence activities. He separated research from the estimating process and proposed a division of research responsibilities among the intelligence agencies. The Intelligence Advisory Committee gained stature as the governing body of the community. Perhaps no action more typified the style and personality of General Smith than the organization of the operational offices of the CIA. The agency had inherited its foreign intelligence and counterintelligence offices from the OSS, and in the 5 years since the Second World War, these had been consolidated, reorganized, and reoriented to peacetime conditions. By 1948, another office had been added to engage in covert operations or political warfare. The new office was in, but not of, the CIA. It took its directives from a State Defense Committee, not the DCI. One of Smith's first actions on becoming director in October 1950 was to announce that he would issue the orders to this office. He later directed that the two offices, foreign intelligence, and covert operations be merged, and that the deputy director concerned and the 2 assistant directors in charge of those offices work out the details. As one of the assistant directors, I participated in what were extended and exhaustive negotiations. In the summer of 1952, Smith finally accepted our proposals and called a meeting of all of the division and staff chiefs of the to-be-merged offices to announce the new organization. Although everyone present knew that the director was impatient to have the merger implemented, there were a couple who wanted to argue it. Smith gave them short shrift. His quick temper flared, and he scathingly stopped the discussion, announced what was to take place, and stalked out. One of my colleagues leaned over and whispered, "My God, if he is that terrifying now, imagine what he must have been at full weight." During the Second World War, when he was Eisenhower's chief of staff, Smith had weighed about 185 pounds, but an operation for stomach ulcers had reduced his size by 50 pounds. End quote. Footnote: Lyman B. Kirkpatrick, Jr., The U.S. Intelligence Community's Foreign Policy and Domestic Activities. New York, Hill and Wang, 1973, pages 32 through 33. When Smith departed from the CIA directorship in 1952, he was succeeded by a man who was not only his equal in organizational abilities, but an individual virtually without equal in intelligence operations. Alan Welsh Dulles, the OSS master spy in Switzerland during World War II, lately head of the CIA's Office of Policy Coordination, which carried out political subversion missions, and brother of the new Secretary of State. While Dulles himself has written very little about his organization and manner of administering the Central Intelligence Agency, one close observer of his operating techniques has written, quote, "One of the first things we did when he became the director was to abolish the office of the Deputy Director of Administration, DDA. In a city renowned for its bureaucratic administration and its penchant for proving how right C. Northcote Parkinson was, Mr. Dulles's first act was more heretical to most Washingtonians than one of Walter Bedell Smith's first actions, the one in which he told the McCarthy, Senate Investigation of Communist Activity hearings, that he thought there might well be communists in the agency. Washington was not as upset about the communists as it was to learn that a major agency of the government had abolished administration. Mr. Dulles took the view of the intelligence professional that it was much more dangerous and therefore undesirable to have all kinds of administrators acquiring more information than they should have than it was to find some way to get along without the administrators. While the public was mulling over that tidbit from the CIA, the real moves were being made inside the organization, where no one could see what was going on. The Deputy of Intelligence, DDI, strengthened by the addition of the current intelligence organization, which prepares the daily intelligence report submitted to the President, and other such tasks, was to be responsible for everything to do with intelligence, and more importantly, was to be encumbered by nothing that had to do with logistics and administration. That was the theory. In practice, the DDI has a lot of administrative and support matters to contend with, as does any other large office. However, as much of the routine and continuing loads as could be was set upon the Deputy Director of Support, DDS. At the same time, the new and growing DDP, Plans, the Special Operations Shop, was similarly stripped of all encumbrances and freed to do the operational work that Dulles saw developing as his task. This left the DDS support with a major task. He was responsible for the entire support of the agency, support of all kinds, at all times, and in all places." End quote. Footnote: L. Fletcher Prouty, The Secret Team. Englewood Cliffs, Prentice Hall, 1973, pages 245 through 246. End footnote. As an intelligence professional, Dulles held strong views as to the type of individuals who should lead the agency and serve it. During the hearings on the proposed National Security Act of 1947, he sent a memorandum on the CIA provisions to Senator Chan Gurney, Republican, South Dakota, chairman of the Committee on Armed Services, indicating his view that the new intelligence entity, quote, should be directed by a relatively small but elite core of men with a passion for anonymity and a willingness to stick at that particular job. They must find their reward in the work itself and in the service they render their government, rather than in public acclaim. End quote. Elsewhere in his statement, he opined that the agency, quote, must have a core of the most competent men which this country can produce to evaluate and correlate the intelligence obtained and to present it in proper form to the interested government departments, in most cases to the State Department, and in many cases to the Department of National Defense, or to both. End quote. Footnote. See U.S. Congress, Senate, Committee on Armed Services, National Defense Establishment, Unification of the Armed Services. Hearings, 80th Congress, First Session. Washington, U.S. Government Print Office, 1947, pages 525 through 528. Dulles continued to express this view after he left the directorship, offering perhaps his most developed account on this point in a 1963 writing. Quote, from the day of its founding, the CIA has operated on the assumption that the majority of its employees are interested in a career and need and deserve the same guarantees and benefits which they would receive if in the Foreign Service or in the military. In turn, the CIA expects most of its career employees to enter its service with the intention of durable association. No more than other large public or private institutions can it afford to invest its resources of time and money in the training and apprenticeship of persons who separate before they have begun to make a contribution to the work at hand. It can, in fact, afford this even less than most organizations for one very special reason peculiar to the intelligence world: the maintenance of its security. A sizable turnover of short-term employees is dangerous because it means that working methods, identities of key personnel, and certain projects in progress will have been exposed in some measure to persons not yet sufficiently indoctrinated in the habits of security to judge when they are talking out of turn and when they are not. The very nature of a professional intelligence organization requires, then, that it recruit its personnel for the long pull, that it carefully screen candidates for jobs in order to determine ahead of time whether they are the kind of people who will be competent, suitable, and satisfied, and that once such people are within the fold, their careers can be developed to the mutual advantage of the government and the officer. End quote. Footnote. Allen W. Dulles, The Craft of Intelligence. New York, Harper & Row, 1973, pages 171 and 172. End footnote. Yet, regardless of these expressions of personnel policy, the overriding factor in CIA recruitment during Dulles's tenure would seem to be security, a condition brought to bear not by the director's own choosing, but rather by the tirades of the junior senator from Wisconsin, Joseph R. McCarthy. Quote, the CIA director told the president he would resign unless McCarthy's vituperation was silenced. Eisenhower had been reluctant to stand up to the politically powerful and politically useful senator, but he accepted Dulles's contention that McCarthy's attacks on the agency were damaging to the national security. Vice President Nixon was dispatched to pressure McCarthy into dropping his plans for a public investigation. The senator suddenly became convinced that, quote, it would not be in the public interest to hold public hearings on the CIA, that perhaps could be taken care of administratively, end quote. The administrative remedy McCarthy demanded as the price of his silence was a vast internal purge of the agency. The senator privately brought his charges against CIA security risks to Dulles's office. He had lists of alleged homosexuals and rich men in CIA employ and provided Dulles with voluminous allegations and denunciations, but no facts. To ensure, however, that his charges were taken seriously by CIA, McCarthy continued to threaten a public investigation. At his infamous hearings on alleged subversion in the Army, the senator frequently spoke of communist infiltration and corruption and dishonesty in the CIA. He called this a very, very dangerous situation, which disturbs me beyond words. The pressure took its toll. Security standards for agency employment were tightened, often to the point of absurdity, and many able young men were kept from pursuing intelligence careers." End quote. The author of the above passage suggests that the effect of the new security standards were profound for the development of the Central Intelligence Agency. In brief, individuals who had been involved in any type of leftist ideological cause would find it difficult to obtain employment with the CIA. Because of the situation, the flow of diverse viewpoints through new personnel was restricted, and a like-minded manner of thinking began to evolve within the agency. As a consequence of this state of affairs, and for other reasons, some CIA employees abandoned their intelligence careers and sought more rewarding positions in the diplomatic and foreign policy establishment. These shifts also had an interesting effect in terms of the CIA's image and impact. State Department officials have learned the power of their clandestine opposite numbers. In March 1954, a Texas attorney with long business experience in South America was named Assistant Secretary of State for Latin American Affairs. At one of his first briefings, the Texan learned that the CIA had set aside $20 million to overthrow a leftist regime in Guatemala. The Assistant Secretary raised vigorous objections to the whole plan until he was silenced by his superior, the Undersecretary of State, who happened to be ex-CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith. On several other occasions during the 1950s, John Foster Dulles felt that his own ambassadors could not be trusted and should not be informed of CIA operations in their countries. And those operations, as often as not, were undertaken by arrogant adventurers who had developed operational independence from a relatively enlightened staff at CIA's Washington headquarters. End quote. At present, the Central Intelligence Agency is thought to be organized into 5 entities: the Office of the Director and its satellites, and 4 functional directorates. Footnote: this general description is taken from Victor Marchetti and John D. Marks, The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, New York, Alfred A. Knopf, 1974, pages 67 through 79. Corroborating information has been compared from other public descriptions of the agency. End footnote. At the head of the agency are the Director and Deputy Director, both of whom serve at the pleasure of the President and are appointed subject to confirmation by the United States Senate. Either of these officials may be selected from among the commissioned officers of the armed services, whether active or retired, but one position must always be held by a civilian. There is also a Deputy Director of Central Intelligence for the intelligence community. Prior to 1973, this official was known as the Deputy Director for Community Relations, who assists the Director of Central Intelligence in his administrative responsibilities outside of managing the agency. One satellite entity attached to the Office of the Director of Central Intelligence is a small group of senior analysts drawn from the CIA and other agencies who prepare the National Intelligence Estimates, which are position papers assessing potentiality or capability for the benefit of U.S. policymakers, e.g., Soviet strategic defense capability, grain production in communist China, or the political stability of Argentina, Chile, Angola, or Jordan. Founded in 1950 as the Board of National Estimates and initially headed by OSS veteran Dr. William Langer, the unit was reorganized in October 1973 when its name was changed to National Intelligence Officers, NIO. Quote, each NIO is either a geographic or functional expert and is allotted one staff assistant. Flexibility is a frequently used word in the CIA under Director William E. Colby, who has recruited an NIO for economic problems from Rand Corporation, another for arms control, Mr. Salt Talks, and others for key geographic areas such as Russia, China, and the Middle East. Reportedly, the NIOs are to be recruited from all agencies within the intelligence community, with a sprinkling of functional experts from the outside, and the military NIOs are to have general officer rank in order to add prestige to the position. If so, this provision is suspect, since the promotion system within the armed forces does not assure that good intelligence estimators will be advanced to general officer rank. On the contrary, as experience in Vietnam has repeatedly demonstrated, high rank is often associated with poor estimating ability and loss of touch with reality. If NIO positions are staffed with general officers, the latter will have to depend on their staff assistants for credible estimates. However, the system as envisaged will enable the NIO to go outside CIA for expertise and advice, thus playing specialists from one government agency or industry against each other in an adversary process of arriving at balanced estimates. It will also enable the NIO to let contracts for the study of certain problems to academia." End quote. The other satellite attached to the Office of the Director of Central Intelligence is the Intelligence Resources Advisory Committee, successor to the National Intelligence Resources Board created in 1968 by CIA Director Richard Helms. Both units were designed to assist in the coordination and management of the intelligence community's budget. While the old board consisted of the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Director of the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, with the Deputy Director of CIA as chairman, the new committee, established during President Nixon's 1971 intelligence reorganization to advise the DCI on the preparation of a consolidated intelligence program budget, added a senior representative from the Office of Management and Budget to the group, and designated the CIA director, acting in his capacity as coordinator of national intelligence, as chairman. Another panel which might be mentioned at this juncture is the United States Intelligence Board. Established in 1960 by a classified National Security Council intelligence directive, the board is the successor to the Intelligence Advisory Committee created in 1950 as an interdepartmental coordinating forum chaired by the CIA director and counting representatives from the Armed Services Intelligence Units, the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the National Security Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Atomic Energy Commission as members. The committee and its successor functioned as a board of directors for the intelligence community. At present, USIB reportedly assists and advises the Director of Central Intelligence with respect to the issuance of national intelligence estimates, setting intelligence collection requirements, priorities, and objectives, coordinating intelligence community estimates of future events and of enemy strengths, controlling the classification and security systems for most of the federal government, and protecting intelligence sources and methods, directing research in various fields of technical intelligence, and deciding what information is to be shared with the intelligence services of allied or friendly nations. The board consists of a representative from the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the National Security Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Energy Research and Development Administration, successor to the Atomic Energy Commission on nuclear intelligence matters, and the Deputy Director of CIA. The Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency was included in 1961, and 3 years later the status of the Armed Services Representatives, the Army, Navy, and Air Force having been represented on the original board, was downgraded from member to observer on the grounds that the Defense Intelligence Agency member represented all of them. In the 1971 Intelligence Community reorganization announced by President Nixon, a Treasury Department representative was added to USIB. Meeting approximately once a week, the board's agenda and minutes are classified. When the panel goes into executive session, all staff members are excluded from the proceedings. USIB is supported by an interdepartmental committee structure which encompasses every aspect of the nation's foreign intelligence requirements, ranging from the methods of collection to all areas of research. While these standing committees have numbered as many as 15, a recent disclosure indicates a reduction to 11 units in mid-1975. Quote, "The other components of the Office of the Director include those traditionally found in governmental bureaucracies: press officers, congressional liaison, legal counsel, and so on. Only two merit special note: the Cable Secretariat and the Historical Staff. The former was established in 1950 at the insistence of the director, General Walter Bedell Smith. When Smith, an experienced military staff officer, learned that agency communications, especially those between headquarters and the covert field stations and bases, were controlled by the clandestine services, he immediately demanded a change in the system. Quote, "The operators are not going to decide what secret information I will see or not see," end quote, he is reported to have said. Thus, the Cable Secretariat, or Message Center, was put under the director's immediate authority. Since then, however, the operators have found other ways, when it is thought necessary, of keeping their most sensitive communications from going outside the clandestine services. The Historical Staff represents one of the CIA's more clever attempts to maintain the secrecy on which the organization thrives. Several years ago, the agency began to invite retiring officers to spend an additional year or two with the agency, on contract, at regular pay, writing their official memoirs. The product of their effort is, of course, highly classified and tightly restricted. In the agency's eyes, this is far better than having former officers openly publish what really happens during their careers with the CIA. End quote. Outside of the Office of the Director, the agency is organized into 4 functional directorates: Operations, Management and Services, Science and Technology, and Intelligence. The first of these, the Directorate of Operations, is the Clandestine Services Unit, reportedly consisting of about 6,000 professionals and clerks in a rough 2-to-1 ratio, with approximately 45% of this workforce stationed overseas, the vast majority in cover positions. Composed of some 15 components, the Directorate has most of its personnel, about 4,800 people, within the so-called area divisions, which correspond to the State Department's geographic bureau arrangement. Quote, "The largest area division is the Far East, with about 1,500 people, followed in order of descending size by Europe, Western Europe only, Western Hemisphere, Latin America plus Canada, Near East, Soviet Bloc, Eastern Europe, and Africa, with only 300 staff. The chain of command goes from the head of the clandestine services to the chief of the area divisions, then overseas to the chiefs of stations, COS, and their chiefs of bases, COB." End quote. There is also a domestic operations division which is, in essence, an area division, but it conducts its mysterious clandestine activities in the United States, not overseas. Footnote: certain of these mysterious clandestine activities have been revealed in U.S. Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, pages 208 through 225. End footnote. Grouped with the area divisions, the Special Operations Division's main function is to provide the assets for paramilitary operations, largely the contracted manpower, mercenaries or military men on loan, the material, and the expertise to get the job done. Apart from the area divisions are 3 staffs within the Directorate of Operations: Foreign Intelligence, Espionage, Counterintelligence, Counterespionage, and Covert Action, which oversee operational policy in their respective specialties and provide assistance to the area divisions and the field elements. Quote, "The remaining 3 components of the clandestine services provide technical assistance to the operational components. These 3 are the Missions and Programs staff, which does much of the bureaucratic planning and budgeting for the clandestine services, which writes up the justification for covert operations submitted for approval to the 40 Committee, the Operational Services Division, which among other things sets up cover arrangements for clandestine officers, and the Technical Services Division, which produces in its own laboratories the gimmicks of the spy trade, the disguises, miniature cameras, tape recorders, secret writing kits, and the like." End quote. The Directorate of Management and Services, formerly the Directorate of Support, is the agency's administrative and housekeeping component. But according to one former insider, most of its budget and personnel is devoted to assisting the clandestine services in carrying out covert operations, contributing in such areas as communications, logistics, and training. Within the Directorate, quote, the Office of Security provides physical protection for clandestine installations at home and abroad and conducts polygraph, lie detector tests for all CIA employees and contract personnel and most foreign agents. The Office of Medical Services heals the sicknesses and illnesses, both mental and physical, of CIA personnel by providing cleared psychiatrists and physicians to treat agency officers, analyzes prospective and already recruited agents, and prepares psychological profiles of foreign leaders, and once, in 1971, at the request of the Watergate plumbers, did a profile of Daniel Ellsberg. The Office of Logistics operates the agency's weapons and other warehouses in the United States and overseas, supplies normal office equipment and household furniture, as well as the more esoteric clandestine material to foreign stations and bases, and performs other housekeeping chores. The Office of Communications, employing over 40% of the Directorate of Management and Services' more than 5,000 career employees, maintains facilities for secret communications between CIA headquarters and the hundreds of stations and bases overseas. It also provides the same services on a reimbursable basis for the State Department and most of its embassies and consulates. The Office of Training operates the agency's training facilities at many locations around the United States and a few overseas. The Office of Personnel handles the recruitment and record-keeping for the CIA's career personnel." End quote. The Directorate of Intelligence, counting some 3,500 employees, is concerned with the generation of finished intelligence products and the provision of certain services of common concern for the benefit of the entire intelligence community. The Directorate's principal units include an Operations Center, Management and Coordination, a Secretariat for the United States Intelligence Board, which the CIA Director chairs, an Intelligence Requirements Service, Collection and Needs, a Central Reference Service, a Foreign Broadcast Information Service, a worldwide radio-television monitoring system, an Office of Operations, an Office of Current Intelligence, Daily Developments, an Office of Strategic Research, Long-Range Planning, an Office of Economic Research, an Office of Basic and Geographical Research, an Imagery Analysis Service, Photographic Analysis, and a National Photographic Interpretation Center, run in cooperation with the Defense Department for analyzing photographs taken from satellites and high-altitude spy planes. The fourth and newest of the agency's directorates, Science and Technology, employs about 1,300 people in carrying out basic research and development functions, the operation of spy satellites, and intelligence analysis in highly technical fields. Composed of an Office of Scientific Intelligence, an Office of Special Activities, an Office of Research and Development, an Office of Electronics, an Office of Special Projects, an Office of Computer Services, and a Foreign Missiles and Space Activities Center, the Directorate has been credited with a leadership role in the development of the U-2 and SR-71 spy planes and, quote, several brilliant breakthroughs in the intelligence satellite field, end quote. In the areas of behavior-influencing drug and communications intercept systems development, the Directorate experienced a certain amount of controversy with regard to testing these entities within the domestic United States. Footnote: see U.S. Commission on CIA Activities within the United States, pages 225 through 232. End footnote. Beyond this structuring of the Central Intelligence Agency, there have been a variety of unofficial affiliates in the service of the CIA, front groups, proprietary organizations, and well-established social, economic, and political institutions which received agency funds for assistance they provided or secretly transmitted such money to a third party for services rendered, at least until these practices were made public. Quote, the CIA's best-known proprietaries were Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, both established in the early 1950s. The corporate structures of these two stations served as something of a prototype for other agency proprietaries. Each functioned under the cover provided by a board of directors made up of prominent Americans, who in the case of RFE incorporated as the National Committee for a Free Europe, and in the case of RL as the American Committee for Liberation. But CIA officers in the key management positions at the stations made all the important decisions regarding the programming and operations of the stations." End quote. Other CIA businesses, which became apparent in the 1960s, were the agency's airlines: Air America, Air Asia, Civil Air Transport, Intermountain Aviation, and Southern Air Transport, and certain holding companies involved with these airlines or the Bay of Pigs effort, such as the Pacific Corporation and the Double Check Corporation. Then, in early 1967, the disclosure was made that the CIA had, for 15 years, subsidized the nation's largest student organization, the National Student Association. Footnote: see Saul Stern, a short account of international student politics and the Gold War with particular reference to the NSA, CIA, etc. Ramparts, V5, March 1967, pages 29 through 38. End footnote. This revelation heightened press interest in CIA fronts and conduits. Eventually, it became known that the agency channeled money directly or indirectly into a panoply of business, labor, and church groups, the universities, charitable organizations, and educational and cultural groups, including African American Institute, American Council for International Commission of Jurists, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, American Friends of the Middle East, American Newspaper Guild, American Society of African Culture, Asia Foundation, Association of Hungarian Students in North America, Committee for Self-Determination, Committee of Correspondence, Committee on International Relations, Fund for International Social and Economic Education, Independent Research Service, Institute of International Labor Research, International Development Foundation, International Marketing Institute, National Council of Churches, National Education Association, National Student Association, Paderewski Foundation, Pan American Foundation, University of Miami, Frederick A. Prager, Publishers, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Synod of Bishops of the Russian Church outside Russia, United States Youth Council, Andrew Hamilton Fund, Beacon Fund, Benjamin Rosenthal Foundation, Borden Trust, Broad High Foundation, Catherwood Foundation, Chesapeake Foundation, David, Joseph, and Winfield Baird Foundation, Dodge Foundation, Edsel Fund, Florence Foundation, Gotham Fund, Heights Fund, Independence Foundation, J. Frederick Brown Foundation, J. M. Kaplan Foundation, Jones O'Donnell Kentfield Fund, Litauer Foundation, Marshall Foundation, McGregor Fund, Michigan Fund, Monroe Fund, Norman Fund, Papaz Charitable Trust, Price Fund, Robert E. Smith Fund, San Miguel Fund, Sidney and Esther Rabb Charitable Foundation, Tower Fund, Vernon Fund, Warden Trust, and Williford Telford Fund. In addition to these domestically based entities, a number of foreign beneficiaries of CIA funds were revealed as well. Probably others have been disclosed which are not recorded here. Undoubtedly, persistent research and investigation will unearth additional entries for this roster. However, to the extent that details regarding the organization of the Central Intelligence Agency remain cloaked in secrecy, the identity of the unofficial affiliates of the CIA will continue to be elusive. This is Our Hidden History.